Council members attending virtually, can you hear me? We're waiting just for a couple presenters to show up, so we're gonna give them a couple minutes to see if they show up before we start the meeting. All right, Mayor, once your mic's on, you're good to go.
All right. I'd like to call to order tonight's study session of June 12th, 2023 at 6:02. And all council members are present with the exception of Council Member Cole and Council Member Brown, who said they were not going to be here at the last meeting. They weren't going to be here this meeting. So Council Members Brown is absent. Do I have a motion to excuse?
Yes, I'll make that motion to excuse Kurt Brown for this evening.
Deputy Mayor has motion to excuse. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Council Member Boteto. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. So Council Member Brown is excused. Council Member Cole also has called in. Do I have a motion to excuse Council Member Cole?
I'll make a motion to excuse Councilmember Cole.
Motion by Council Member Boteto. Do I have a second? Second by Council Member Newman. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? No opposed. Council is excused. Okay, first item on the agenda is Library Capital Facilities Area Update with Pierce County Library District Executive Director Gretchen Casarati. Take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I turn it over to Ms. Casarati, I just want to let you know that she'll be here tonight to give council an update on the library capital facilities area and the library's efforts to get that on, not only get that on the ballot, but get it fully approved. So
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, Council, thank you so much for having me back. I apologize that it has taken so long. I have been out sick and traveling and lots happening, but I appreciate the opportunity to come back before you. So much has happened since I last met with you. And so I wanted to be able to give you an update and answer any questions that you might have. As far as where we are at and the status of the proposed LCFA and bond measure for the voters in Sumner, the Pierce County Council did approve the resolution to move forward, and we have submitted and completed all the necessary paperwork with Pierce County Elections as well as the County Council. So all systems go from a technical standpoint for the August 1st primary election. That included the library working with our attorney to write the explanatory statement that goes in the voter pamphlet and administer the for and against committee statements. So the ballots are expected to be mailed on or around the 14th of July. And election day is August 1st, as you all know. With the legal boundaries that were set for this ballot measure, we do anticipate that we should know roughly by 9 p.m., although they won't be certified election results. We should have a pretty clear idea that evening where the measure stands with respect to the voters. Our normal and customary communications are all underway in accordance with the PDC, the Public Disclosure Commission. Our typical activities for communications include a direct mailer, which is scheduled to go out this week. So for those of you residing in the legal boundaries, you can keep an eye on your mailbox and see that coming up. We also have open houses that are scheduled, 2 on June 28th at 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. Those are being advertised through the website, through the newsletter, through all of our printed materials, as well as in the branch posters and so on. So encourage anyone who can attend is welcome to, and encourage you to share that information out, to encourage people to come and communicate with us, to ask questions, to hear an information presentation on the ballot measure and what it entails. And I mentioned that we did have information materials out through those networks. And we are also working really hard to do outreach to the business community. We have been having a lot of individual meetings with business owners and influencers within the Puyallup Sumner Chamber. I was out sick, so Mary Getchell, our communications director, pinched hit. Is that the baseball term? For the Government Affairs Committee meeting to provide information to that group through the chamber. And we are also attending as many Main Street Association and city events to have a presence and be available to answer questions and share information. So that's sort of where we stand with respect to the August 1st primary. One thing that did not happen as we had anticipated was the Pierce County Council did not move forward our resolution for the November ballot. Essentially some miscommunication with so many cooks in the kitchen and a new process that's new to everyone. It was something that was overlooked. So we are coordinating with them. There would be no action required. The council and the board have already approved all the necessary paperwork. It's really an administrative process. That will hopefully be resolved in July, because the deadline for the November ballot is July, 14th. I didn't write that date down. It's in the Pierce County Elections Guide. So our hope was to have that move forward still either later this month or at the beginning of July. That means that we also needed to administer a second process for the for and against statements. So we hope this isn't confusing, but it is a necessary step. We have a call on our website right now for the for and against committee statements for the November general election as well. We will use the same materials, the same explanatory statement. All of that has been run through legal review and has all been seen by you and the library board. And so we are assuming, as it was passed unanimously by the council, there would not be any reason that would not move forward for the November ballot as well. But it is an administrative process that we're going through to make sure that we meet those deadlines. Also, in the meantime, we don't let the grass grow under our feet. We are preparing for what would happen if the measure passes. So we are ready to go. That includes starting to meet with the right folks to discuss the LCFA bylaws and some of the more administrative steps with the council, but also on our team, on our side, preparing an RFQ for architectural services, meeting with the financial advisors and the assessors and all the other agencies to understand the process and timelines for the coordination of when bonds would need to be sold, when levy certifications would need to be submitted, and the revenue collection, so that we could understand when we would need to be paying bills for any of the construction project, so that we could, as I said, hit the ground running and be really ready to go when we know the outcome of the election. That will include also writing an interlocal agreement between the library and the Pierce County Council with respect to the LCFA, which is administered through the council. And so I will continue to coordinate with Jason on behalf of the city to incorporate any elements that you all may have opinions on or want to be included in. We're really just at the very beginning of that, because we want to be ready, but not spend too much time, get too far ahead of ourselves. And funding. The last thing to share with you guys, I got to end on a high note, is that our original request to the state legislature for $1 million, thanks to Representative Drew Stokesbury here in District 31, we actually were able to secure $2 million in state funding for this capital project. So we were really, really, really pleased and excited about that. And our capital campaign with our library foundation has been sort of in a holding pattern. And we are starting to gear up to start to discuss grants and pending the outcome of the election, really resume that campaign robustly. So I hope I covered everything. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Could you repeat the dates and the location of the open houses?
Yes, it is June 28th at 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. at the Sumner Library.
Okay. Do we have any questions?
I
Councilmember
just want
Botetto.
some clarification. I know I understand about the possibility of needing the election in November. And can you explain why that would happen? You know, what do we need to, how many votes do you need to pass, you know, it in August, the levy in August?
I would have to look up the numbers. I don't have them off the top of my head, but it was something like 1465 to validate the election.
Yeah,
And then beyond that, it would just be 60% of the total turnout to pass it. So the reason we're queuing up for the November ballot is that if it doesn't validate or it doesn't pass, there would be essentially a second run at the November general election, but the deadline for filing is August 1st. So we won't know the outcome of the primary election in order to do the filing for the paperwork of all the steps for the
Yeah.
November. So Pierce County Elections has informed us if it passes, they will just pull it. But otherwise it will be ready and in the queue for all of their procedural steps to put it on the ballot.
okay. And then do you know how many votes you need to validate it in November? Or
It
what
would
are
be the same because
same
it's
number?
based on the general election of the prior year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Councilmember Stewart, did you have a question or,
No, it was already answered. Thank you.
okay, anybody else? No?
It's really weird to see the back of my head.
I know.
I know.
So I guess that's it. Thank you.
Please reach out if you have any questions or suggestions. If there's people that I could meet with, I'm happy to spend the time to meet with people who have concerns or questions. So Jason has my contact information. Thank you very
Thank you very
much. Good to
much.
see you all again.
All right.
Regular driver.
Okay. So I will hand it over to Jason.
Okay, so the next item on
Bill.
tonight's agenda is a recap for our 2023 legislative session. It was a very busy legislative session. So Carmen will kick us off, and we also have our lobbyist, Bill Clark here.
Yep,
She'll
I see him
introduce.
now. I didn't see him there.
So thank you to Bill for joining us. Apparently hotel Wi-Fi was being a little tricky, but he made it. So anyway, the PowerPoint before you kind of goes through your 24, what you first passed as your 24 agenda and how that fared. And then from there, we will go on to some other surprises and looking toward the 24 agenda. We'll start with the 23 one. It's hard to work in 2 years at once in your head. So let's see, Bill, do you want me to just kind of do the first snapshot of each and then have you add your
Yeah,
commentary?
sure, Carmen. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. If you want to kind of do that, and then I'll add in color commentary as appropriate. That's great.
Okay. So the first was fund key infrastructure projects. And on that one, thank you, Jeff, for adding Bill. So on that one, we did very well, actually. You just heard Gretchen talk about the library went from 1 million to 2. That was not ours, but we had added to our agenda our support for that item. We actually did not get the capital request for the River Grove pedestrian bridge, not for lack of trying. However, Puget Sound Regional Council has funded that piece, so that continues to move forward even without receiving the state funding. And then Ryan House was included in the full appropriation for heritage capital projects. There was also a bonus, 5 million for Friar Avenue. It's kind of funny when a bonus is 5 million. we were not on the recommended funding list. And then as other projects shook out, we actually moved up and got funded by WashDOT. So Public Works and I will work on that next year when we put together an agenda. We realized from this, maybe we should include projects we are recommended for funding and projects we could still be recommended for funding later in the session. So we will fix that next time. Bill, anything about this? One's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I just say overall, keep in mind that, in the member request process in the legislature, whether it's capital budget projects or transportation budget projects, members from the legislative delegation can submit requests. For example, for the 31st district, there'll be requests from pretty much every city, the county, lots of nonprofits. And so it's always kind of a mystery which ones get funded and which ones don't. Depends on what the other transportation projects are, what other nonprofits are requesting. And then, some of the member requests have been in the queue to get funded for 2 or 3 years. And so, part of it is you don't get what you don't ask for. And so it's a matter of getting your requests in. Both Rep. Stokesbury, Rep. Robertson, but also Senator Fortunato had, for example, the River Road Bridge on their submission list. I think we keep up at that because even though it got some funding, it's certainly not fully funded yet. And so it's just a matter of getting those requests in each year and pulling in other funding too, because the legislature likes to see that there are other sources of funding coming in, so that PSRC funding will help for future requests because they know it has some support from PSRC and that'll help get legislative funding down the road.
Okay, so we have a question here from Deputy Mayor Hochstetter.
Yeah, on the bonus, the 5 million for the Friar Avenue portion of the Sumner Link Trail, can we have somebody explain to us what that project is?
Sure, I can do a quick dive, but I also have all the backup singers back there ready to answer any questions I can't field. So I do know. You okay for me to start, Mike? Okay. If you use the trail today, it's complete, but the portion on Friar is a bike lane on Friar Avenue. So it's the white stripe with the little bicycle person. Which it's there and that is great, but this will actually separate it, move it off the road and do like the rest of the trail where it's its own 5-foot wide paved path, not right next to the roadway.
But in the property, in where the grass is, not on the road?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, I think I've heard of that before. I just needed a reminder.
Absolutely.
There's lots of trail links.
Well, and I think for me, this one's a key one too, as the communications person, because it's the one so many people see. So it's a good sale and reminder of the rest of the trail that's so hidden up in our north area.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else? I don't see them. Okay,
All right. Next one, we had grouped a bunch of things in support local decision-making authority. And I will go through the ones that we had thought of, and then there were a few we had not thought of that came up. So first one, Bill, was the Foster Task Force recommendations. This is again where we were one of the pilot projects, which is moving our project along, but we're hoping that that influences legislation to come for all cities. But Bill?
Yeah, on the Foster Task Force, this is the bill that was created a couple years ago that selected 5 cities or 5 water utilities as kind of special pilot projects to have a special permitting status. And so the water rate mitigation standards for our permitting for additional water rights that's part of the overall White River Restoration Project have a special status. Even with that special status, it's been pretty hard going on permitting with ecology. And so this task force wants to use Sumner, Port Orchard, Spanaway, and Yelm as kind of examples of how to modernize the state's water right permitting system. I think we'll probably be asked to play a higher profile role in this issue going forward because there's, I think, general support for what the city's been working on, not only from Department of Ecology and Fish and Wildlife, but also the tribes. In that relationship between local governments and water right permitting and the tribes was the one that really held back the bill this year. So I would expect additional kind of activity on that going forward next year.
Hey, the other 2 were restoring the Public Works Assistant account. That's supposed to be a recurring account of funding to help cities with public works projects that had funds diverted a few years ago for schools. And now that diversion expired. So we're back to full funding. It was nice to not see that diverted again. And then the next one is quite a big one because we didn't know how this was going to come at us, but we knew there had been prior efforts to basically preempt local land use by passing laws that would dictate land use and zoning, especially around transit stations, especially for downtown Sumner. There were a flood of bills, lots of varying degrees. The lightest passed, and but we expect to see more of this coming. We don't expect this to be the end. And kind of the ongoing thing is some were positioning this as for or against affordable housing. So what's really important is all the work you're doing to zone Sumner the way Sumner would like it to be zoned and bring in affordable housing and show those two can actually coexist. It's not one or the other. So Bill?
Yeah, just on the last two bullets, I'd say, the Public Works Assistance Account was a big achievement. The Public Works Assistance Account is funded by portions of the state real estate excise tax and the solid waste tax and the utility tax. So it comes from local government funding with the promise that it goes back to local governments in the form of low interest loans. And the legislature for the last decade had been sweeping that account either for, dealing with the budget situation after the financial crisis in 09 and 10, or for McCleary and the education funding. This is the first year they finally left it alone. And so if left alone, that program will rebuild, and with loan repayments will be a probably $1 billion program with specific low interest loan funding for local governments, and also really trying to really identify the faster growing medium-sized jurisdictions that have the most infrastructure needs like Sumner. So that was probably top of the list for AWC, but also for water and sewer districts, PUDs and others. And then on the housing issue, Carmen's right. There was this balance between more aggressive action on housing supply and local control. I think of the bills that passed, there was the bill on middle housing, duplexes, triplexes, et cetera. The one next year, I think, to keep your eye on will be the transit-oriented development bill as it relates to the area near the Sounder station. Because one of the challenges, I think, is differences between different forms of major transit stops, whether it's Sound Transit light rail and those huge stations in King County versus Sounder versus Bus Rapid Transit versus Park and Ride, and trying to look at different levels of zoning in those areas. The other thing I think that'll be interesting is the Low Income Housing Alliance has a very aggressive position on mandatory affordability, meaning there has to be a mandate for, 20% affordable units or 50% affordable units. I know some cities are kind of wary of that in that they're having trouble getting additional units built with no affordability requirements. And so there'll be a lot of discussion about local authority over developing local affordable housing programs under existing authority versus having those affordability requirements specified on a statewide level, even though what may work for affordability programs in one city may not work within a different city. So I think that TOD bill is probably of the major housing bills, the one that didn't pass this year that will be around next year.
Go ahead, Barbara.
So going back to that $400 million, that's for the whole state, correct?
Yep.
It sounds good. But how much do you think we could be applying for, or how does it work? How does that money work, I guess?
Yeah. So, and Carmen knows the stat. She gave me the stat about the number of public works projects that are currently underway by the city. It's pretty impressive and staggering at the same time. The Public Works Assistance Account works on kind of rolling application process to the Public Works Board. They usually do, I think, 2 cycles per year. And keep in mind that the $400 million is just the funding available because the legislature didn't divert the funding this year. It's a revolving loan program. And so the money, the account will build up over time. It'll become bigger than $400 million. Had the legislature left it alone, it would be $1 billion plus loan program right now. If left alone, it will rebuild into that size of a program. And then they have an application process a couple times a year where local governments, can be cities, counties, water districts, et cetera, apply for different types of projects. It can be water, sewer, stormwater, transportation, things like that. And so there's, it's unknown right now how much of that will go to Sumner. It depends on other funding sources that the city has for its projects, and then how its projects rank compared to other local governments that make those applications.
Okay.
To answer your question a different way, we do plan on applying for Public Works Trust Fund monies for some needed upgrades at our wastewater treatment facility.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to hear.
Right.
This next slide actually goes beyond our agenda. This is, on the topic of affordable housing and permits. There were a lot of bills proposed and a lot of bills passed. And we'll go into this more later, but this one fit this category of, local control versus state control. So Ryan provided this list of kind of the highlights. There is a correction from the version in the packet. As you'll see, a recurring theme through this presentation, it was very difficult to track everything, both everything that was proposed and what actually ended up passing, more so than any other session we've ever experienced. So this is an overview of the affordable housing and permits. You'll see in the green there is some action that this will cause at your level to keep us in line with these changes. If you have any further questions, Ryan was an active participant. He waded through all those bills and he did comments. So if you have any questions on this, I can probably defer this to Ryan.
And we do plan on coming back to council at a future study session and digging into these in more depth. And some of them, like Carmen mentioned, will require code amendments now. Another stack of them will require code amendments after our comp plan is adopted. So there's kind of two different types of bills, and when they go into effect and when we need to change some things. Changes are happening.
So the green writing means what exactly? Is that from Ryan, the green writing?
Right. So that gives you what it means for us.
Yeah, that's what I was,
Yep.
that's what I was hoping it was, that he's saying that this is what happened, the first line, and then this is what we will probably have to do, the work we will have to do on this end. Ryan,
Yes.
is that what you're hoping for with those? So is
Yes,
is
that
that
is-
homework for us then to read?
That's correct, Deputy Mayor. This is a very short summary of some very long and somewhat complex bills that came out of the legislature this session, and we will, as Jason said, be back in front of council to go over these different things in greater detail as to what it means to Sumner in terms of changes to our code.
So these are just two things that were passed. We're not doing things preemptive. We were going to be responding to what passed.
Correct.
Already.
We're responding to the bills that passed. And as this kind of touches on, it's everything from, design review or design review standards, accessory dwelling units, which I can say that the council, we adopted recently changes to our accessory dwelling unit code and made a lot of progress in terms of how it compares to the more recent bills. And so not a lot of changes there. We have a good permit review process. We will still have to make some changes based on the new state law, but in terms of our timeliness, that's really the intent of the bill. I think we do really well at. And then a few other things related to middle housing and trying to make sure that there's opportunity for dwelling units, even in commercial and mixed use residential zones. So there's a lot to digest, and we'll be back with more details on those areas.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Okay. Next.
And this is the part Jason was mentioning, that there are things that changed our comprehensive plan update that's underway. So stay tuned. This one actually was one we did not see coming. It's about water utilities and shutoffs, and this grew. It no longer fit in this presentation, so stay tuned. This is the next item. This is a little teaser coming up at your council study session. Will be a full presentation on this one because it is such a change for us and how it impacts our utilities. So, but it it fits. It's just another example. I left this one slide because it is another example of the state changing how a city does business. And also on that theme, policing and police reforms. This is the one you probably heard the most about in the media and social media. Again, Chief is here to answer any further questions, but the recriminalization of drug possession that actually got kicked to a special session, but it did pass. The one thing, so the green is kind of the more positive, the red is the, maybe a little more negative to the city. It did add, one thing that I didn't hear a lot in the media is it did add treatment facilities, except safe needle sites, as essential public facilities, which very much limits the city's ability to regulate those should one want to come into our community. So that was one thing I wish the mainstream media had picked up a little bit more, because when that happens, people are going to be looking to the city, and we've now been given what we can and can't do from the state. The next one was improved safety with revised pursuit law. There were some modifications. I believe from our perspective, there's still more that could be done. And that's the blue. And then kind of the same thing for working with WASPIC. In general, in this session, good things happen. 5 million for law enforcement wellness programs. That's a near and dear to the Sumner Police heart. But there are still a lot of just general comments where, we had asked for legislators to work with WASPIC, so there was a little bit more understanding of how law enforcement works. And there are still a lot of different voices giving opinions at the state level. So, but that's more of an opinion whether or not that one was achieved. Bill?
Yeah, this was a fascinating topic. I would defer to the chief on, some of the details, because it's a really complex issue. I know it's nice with Rep. Robertson's background within law enforcement. He was in the middle of this debate, and I know was in contact with Sumner folks on it. I would make a couple observations on the legislature's approach on this. The Blake fix was necessary because the legislature passed legislation that was going to expire this year. And so this was one of the issues that they had to resolve during the 2023 session. Ultimately, the Senate passed a bipartisan bill mid-session that was over in the House. And ultimately, on the last day of session, it was thought that there was a version of that bill that would get bipartisan support, or at least a majority of Democrats to pass it. And for various reasons, it didn't. The version that the House was willing to run wouldn't get a majority of Democratic members. But I think in the eyes of in the Republican caucus, it wasn't strong enough on at least the gross misdemeanor approach to certain drug offenses. And so it failed on the House floor. And that's a real rarity in the legislature, because typically you're not going to run a bill on the floor of either chamber unless you have the votes to pass it. And it wasn't close, right? It failed by 10 plus votes. And I think the entire kind of Seattle area delegation voted against it, with the debate being, criminalization versus treatment and those different approaches. And you see it right now with the Seattle City Council not putting into place in the city of Seattle ordinances a bill that in essence follows the Blake legislation passed by the legislature. So Seattle's in a tough spot, I think, in terms of how they're dealing with it. That kind of drug down the legislation on the final day of session, necessitating the special session that the legislature came back on just for one day to pass the final Blake bill. It was a really tough political time, I think, especially in the House, because you have that dynamic where in the majority party, they don't want to run a bill that so many members of their caucus cannot support and will not support, but clearly they needed a bipartisan approach to this issue to get a majority vote. So politically, it was pretty fascinating to watch. Pretty tough for the House to not be able to get it done during the regular session, but it is a really hard issue. So I think the other issue that is still out there is some of the adequacy of funding for some of the law enforcement wellness programs, for the grants, for treatment facilities, and for specialized drug courts too. So it obviously is going to be an ongoing issue, but it was a very challenging political issue to get done this session.
Yep.
Do we have the definition of a treatment facility? Chief, or?
It's in that legislation. There is a definition for it. I can get it for you. from that bill, yeah. I don't have it offhand though, sorry.
But I mean, is it generally, does that mean an inpatient situation, a walk-up situation?
It can be both. I recall looking, I think it includes both inpatient overnight or walk-in situations too.
I think it's very broad to address a number of treatment options as well as residential recovery homes. So it's pretty broad.
Okay.
And then again, treating it as essential public facilities is going to limit the city's ability in zoning those types of facilities.
We'll have to make zoning for them or just allow them, write it up to allow them in certain zones?
Yeah, we'll have to look at our options for that. But as the chief was saying, if it's considered an essential public facility, the city has less control or no control, depending on what it is in terms of being preempted by state law.
But we can decide what areas it can go in if with zoning. I mean, we could have some little bit of control over it or.
Ryan, for education purposes, can you share what other types of public facilities are?
Yeah, absolutely. So other essential public facilities include things like the regional transit facilities, correction facilities, large regional transportation facilities, things that are considered essential. And I didn't realize this was in here until tonight.
So that means they can condemn land to make them?
Yes, they can condemn land to make them, and then they can preempt local authority when it comes to how they are regulated.
Okay, so when you will be, Ryan, you will be putting some sort of study session together on that sort of issue, so we'll then get some kind of an idea of what
Yes.
might be interested or what something looks like when
Yep.
it's gonna come here.
I need to get up to speed on this. I didn't realize this was in, I didn't realize they had GMA in this bill, but they do. So I need to get up to speed on it. My apologies for not being ready.
We'll let Ms. Marquez also weigh in, because I know her and I have looked at this a little bit already and
One thing I wanted to add to what Chief and Ryan just mentioned is we already have treatment facilities in our city. But the piece on the zoning is that we know through case law and through other cities' practices that you can't require the placement of essential public facilities so far away from other services that they're inaccessible. We learned that through the homeless shelter and homeless encampment case law that came down. We've seen that through a number of other types of facilities. So while you have some control over where they can be located, it's pretty minimal in terms of access to other resources.
Yeah, and I don't think that worries me as much, or I guess I just wanted to know what was considered a treatment facility. I mean, it's just such a broad word, what are we talking about exactly? But it sounds like we will be educated on that when it gets to the point that.
Yeah, it's going to include all inpatient, outpatient, living halfway homes. It really is a very broadly defined term under the new state law.
All right, thank you.
Go ahead, Barbara.
So you say there's some already in Sumner, and can you tell us something about them? Are they like in-home treatment or halfway houses, or are there medical?
We do have some known halfway residential homes. There is a treatment facility off of Bonnie Avenue, and it's actually a facility. It's an inpatient facility.
Okay. All right, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
And then in past presentations, this was a very small portion, but we've called this the avalanche of bills. This was a stat provided by WASPIC. And one reminder is because there's a biennium, those 1,665 bills that did not pass are still technically alive in 24. So I'll get into just a kind of a quick overview of some of the things that passed and some of the things that were proposed, just to give you, this is kind of a glimpse forward of where our 24 agenda is probably headed. Bill, anything you want to say at this point before I jump in?
No, we can keep going on that.
I'm so apologize, the type is very little, but that's kind of the point. These are just examples. And most of these I pulled from things either we were tracking or AWC provided in their wrap up. Both good and bad. Again, we're going to talk about the utility shutoffs. Some things that helped with lowest responsive bidder and contracting. Some clarification of impact fees. Kind of expand the definition of street racing. So kind of across the boards, lots of different smaller pieces that do still affect the city. Let me go. And then some of the ones that were proposed but did not pass, but they're still there to potentially is, a variety of things. The first two were kind of funny because they were almost opposite each other, making it illegal to turn right on red within the vicinity of schools or parks, which would make the sign shop go crazy probably. And then making it legal to cross streets anywhere. So lots of, kind of had all different bills coming from lots of different places. So again, all of these on this list did not pass, but they could still come back. Bill, at this point, anything you'd like to add?
Well, yeah, I just say that the avalanche reference I think is appropriate. Keep in mind that during the prior two kind of COVID sessions, this was the first year that the legislature was fully back in person for kind of a normal legislative session. During the two COVID years, when the session was kind of virtual, again, it wasn't a requirement because I don't think you can mandate this on legislators. There was kind of a request from leadership that the legislators would not sponsor more than 10 bills. They wouldn't introduce more than 10 bills. And that was because of the different COVID procedures they had to use, et cetera, just for bills to move through the system. With that COVID period behind us, clearly the request to limit yourself to 10 bills went away too, and legislators took it upon themselves to make up for lost time, right? I mean, there is way more bills than people anticipated, not only in terms of the volume of bills, but the kind of, I would say, micromanagingness of the bills, whether it's on local governments, utility operations, the business community, state agencies feel the same way. Legislature really very, very activist, and you had a lot of new legislators that were very willing to, take a step further into internal operations of different entities, whether they're public or private, to really micromanage their operations through state legislation. You can see it across the board. So, and that's why there's so many bills remaining for next session. All those bills that didn't pass this year remain alive, plus the bills that get introduced next year.
Jeff, can you see if other council members have questions? No hands up?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I know you have a few more, a couple more items coming, so I'm going to kind of jet through the last slides and then kind of pause for Bill and questions then at
Okay.
that point.
Thank you.
First, just thank yous. Both the 31st, which is our district, and our neighboring 25th, always very responsive, very active with interacting with us and asking our opinions and thoughts on things. So we really appreciate that. Our two representatives actually held one of their open houses in our council chambers. So we appreciate their accessibility. Representative Stokesbury is the new House Minority Leader, so his accessibility might have just gone down, but his role went up. Looking into 24, as you can see, the theme through here is how to expect the unexpected. So, I'll work with Bill and we'll bring you something this fall, but I think, one of the themes is going to be really working with cities, and you'll see more when Jeff goes into this utility bill one. This one's a prime example of, trying to work with the state to, if they want to run cities, to at least do it where it makes sense for us, instead of spending a lot of our time and money maybe in the places where it doesn't help our residents as much as maybe they're thinking it does. And just one thing is they are headed into elections themselves. So the short session will be shorter. It's not producing the budget, but it is also their election season. And as I said, we understand, not every city can be as perfect as Sumner, but, trying to work with the state with this new kind of urge across the boards to kind of almost micromanage city services when they don't, this isn't what they do day to day, so they're not understanding the actual implications. And just a reminder, this is why we do an agenda, and all the departments watch their different WASPIC and their different organizations to send me what we think is coming. Again, so this one will be interesting. I'm not entirely sure what we'll have for you in the fall. Bill?
No, I was just gonna say to the prior slide, I think the legislative delegation for the 31st is a very good mix, right? A mix of personalities are on different committees with Rep. Stokesbury becoming minority leader. That's helpful. It gets him off of running appropriations, which in some ways is too bad, but it's I think a great move for their caucus. It's a very good move for him. And then I think other legislators outside the 31st, you know, Senator Gildon, for example, who's from Puyallup, obviously has a connection to Sumner. And so area legislators also are very helpful on Sumner issues. And then, yeah, over the summer, I think we'll look at some of the land use issues that are still hanging around. That foster water rates issue is certainly one, and then continued mop up and kind of funding on the Blake issue, I think remains an issue for 2024, plus that host of all the other issues hanging around.
One more, okay.
This bottom line thing that you wrote out to encourage the state to run state services rather than micromanage cities, that's such a big issue. And I'm wondering, how do you hope to get that across? Is that Bill's job? I mean, how does that even, I just wondered if you had a plan or were thinking of a way to do that, or.
Not a great one yet. I mean, I think this is a big question for AWC as well. I mean, they definitely see this trend, and they are the Association of Washington Cities. So it
Yes.
will be interesting.
So
as-
uniting with other cities,
Right.
because just one person squawking a little bit isn't going to get the whole big idea across. So that's something that our mayor and their city administrator is going to take to all Washington cities and try to discuss.
Yeah, and I can tell you, this has been on AWC's radar for a couple of years now. And even when we were at conference last year, Mayor Hayden and I attended a whole session on that AWC put on about home rule and making sure that, you know, cities exercise their home rule. You know, you guys are elected as council members by your constituents to represent our community. You're here every single day. State legislators are not. And sometimes, you know, what I've heard from AWC is state legislators feel that, you know, they're doing more of a service by being able to make these hard decisions that they sometimes feel that local council members are not willing to make when it comes to, you know, land use decisions and housing affordability. And, you know, I've said it before to a number of you, and I think even in a council meeting, I'm really proud of the work that our council has done on affordable housing and changing zoning. I think we are probably ahead of a lot of cities, and that's why some of the state legislators feel the need to step in and enforce some of the cities that have not been as progressive as Sumner and haven't been doing their hard work to start making them take notice. Bill, I know you're down there, you see other cities. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, and I think, you know, like especially on some of the land use and housing stuff, there are a lot of cities that have been, you know, very reluctant to make changes to their zoning code, whether it's a town center type situation or even allowing ADUs or modest amounts of, you know, multifamily construction. Obviously, that's not been Sumner. And so, you know, some of the, I think, legislative approach to mandate certain things on cities is not because of cities like Sumner, it's because of other cities. But when you have, you know, one growth management act and you're going to pass one bill, all cities that plan within GMA fall within that. AWC did a nice job on a number of the bills to have it reflect, you know, cities by size, areas of cities by proximity to mass transit facilities and things like that. But that, you know, I anticipate this whole issue of kind of, you know, state mandates versus local control on a whole host of issues is going to be a theme, you know, for the next decade. Again, because I think you have, looking at the newer crop of legislators that have come in the last really, you know, 2 to 4 years, they're very activist minded. And so they have clear objectives on a whole host of policies, whether it's, you know, housing or social services or things like that, criminal justice. And they want to impose those on in state law, even though it's cities and counties that have to implement those laws. So I think that's going to be a major theme the next 10 years.
I'll just say that my concern on that is I see some things get passed that they think seems like a good idea. But when we're a small city, even though we're progressing, have done things, they pass things that set up things that we can't even possibly handle or cost us more money than it's worth and all those sort of things. And somewhere there's got to be some people that are local that can advise these legislators the other consequences that they're not seeing. And I don't understand quite how that can be done, but they just don't see the whole complete picture, I don't think. And that's the part that worries me with more and more of this micromanaging.
And if I could just add, I want to add a clarification. Our legislators from the 31st have been extremely responsive to the city's opinion on things. And I can tell you on a lot of these bills that really were, top-down legislation onto cities, our representatives did not pass. They voted no on them. So just, they are definitely hearing us, but they're not in the controlling party and they're 3 votes.
I think the other shift to add from the engagement end is how that, as Jason described it, how that's changing when people in town would like to provide feedback. I know the mayor had to say a couple times, and I did too, when we were getting, as the session's underway, we're getting residents or businesses saying, what are you doing about public safety? And it's like, well, these bills are actually being debated right now. You're clearly passionate about this, go watch, speak, testify, get involved. And that's something they were used to doing at the city level, but now with some of this shifting to the state, the way to make individuals' voices heard where the decisions are being made is now at the state level. So sometimes that might be something you have to say as a city council member, is remind people session's underway, it is public. And, as things get more in detail at the state level, that means more individuals need to make their voice heard at the state level as well.
And while we've done a good job planning for the housing targets and population targets set out, under Vision 2050, under GMA, not all cities have been that good. That's why you're seeing the state come in and say, well, you just have to do it around the transit station, instead of saying, well, maybe that's not the best place in the city. Maybe a half-mile radius isn't good. Maybe it's a quarter. And, we've done that hard look here. That's why we have the town center plan. That's why we have East Sumner neighborhood plan. So now that they're coming in and just trying to draw a radius around major transit or schools, some of these bills that didn't pass were like around every school, every park, every bus stop, and making more neighborhoods more dense. It's just something that we are going to be constantly fighting, especially in the next couple of years, to maintain local control of how do we grow responsibly? How do we put the density where we think it needs to be? Not just because there's a train station, it has to be right there. So.
Thank you, Bill, for all your hard work, keeping your eye out for us.
Yeah, thanks to everybody, and especially Carmen and Jason during the legislative session too.
All right. Okay, guess we will move on to ordinance number 2859, amending Sumner Municipal Code 13.25, utility disconnection and reconnection.
Thank you. While Mr. Stephens gets the presentation up, I'll just tell you, this is kind of a continuation on one of the bills passed was House Bill 1329 that relates to our utility disconnection policies. So I'll let him tell you all about it in just a second.
Sorry, wearing multiple hats today's meeting. So as Carmen mentioned, House Bill 1329 is a specific piece of legislation that immediately impacts both the city's finance and public works departments. And what House Bill 1329 does is it doesn't allow utilities to shut off water during heat-related alerts. And we must offer to reconnect customers who are without water during these same time periods. If a customer does need to be reconnected, we can set them up with a payment plan, but that payment plan is based on their income levels. We must also track this program and report it annually to the state. And this new law goes into effect July 1st, so which is coming up in just a few weeks. And it will require a code change to for us to be compliant. Put it on the other screen and I can move this.
Carmen went to sleep.
There we go. Yes. So real quickly, kind of there is a watch and a warning system. So any one of these heat related warnings that are issued. So it could be an excessive heat warning, an excessive heat watch, a heat advisory, or even something similar would prohibit us from doing utility disconnections. And there are some official definitions on what these mean, but to be honest with you, they don't mean a whole lot because these advisories are done on the local level. So the Seattle office of the Northwest Weather Service sets these alerts. And we had one as recently as Mother's Day weekend where we had a high of 85 degrees over that 3-day weekend, and they issued a heat advisory. I think a heat watch thinks that it's a 50% chance or more, and a heat advisory is 80% chance of more that we're going to have high heat. So any of these sort of watches come into place prohibits us from doing utility disconnections. So some of the challenges. As far as a payment plan for a customer that needs to be reconnected. So this would be a customer that is currently without water, maybe has been without water for a month or longer. All of a sudden it's hot out, we have a heat advisory going on and they call us and they want to get reconnected. Based on this bill, we have to do that provided they enter into a payment plan, but that payment plan is limited on their income, by their income. This isn't information that we typically gather and track. So creates a whole new process for us to do. Weather changes quickly, often over the weekend. A heat advisory can go into effect for a weekend and it can get pushed out to shut-off day. It can end sooner, they can rescind it. So it makes planning difficult. It often has staff impacts. Finance dedicates 2, if not 3 staff members to running shutoffs. So this is preparing the list, gathering the information and getting it sent out and dealing with the customer service related to the shutoff process. Our shops department has 2 or more employees working an entire day doing disconnects and reconnects, often working overtime. So we lose that. All of a sudden, we now have flexibility on when those shutoff days can occur because they're going to fluctuate based on the weather, which makes it hard to plan. And then also, the state has not provided any clear directions as far as what we're supposed to report, who we report to, when we report it. It's going to be some sort of annual reporting. That's all still to be worked out.
So on average, how many are disconnected from the system? And how much would it cost if they were never disconnected? I mean,
A great question that's coming.
okay, thank you.
So some of our immediate implementation, as I mentioned, this has a July 1st timeline where this goes into effect. So we will be bringing an ordinance to council next week. We will become junior meteorologists and we'll be watching for weather warnings and advisories leading up to shutoff time. So several days before the day of, to see if we need to cancel our disconnects or move them. We are required to provide notice. So Carmen has already been working on a notice going out in the e-news and on the city website. We'll be putting notices on the back of our utility bills on our shutoffs that alert people that the shutoff date could fluctuate based on temperatures. And that if there is an excessive heat warning in effect and you have been disconnected, to call our office and then we can work to get you reconnected. Let's see. Then also, how that will work, that process. We still are going to be reconnecting people just during business hours. So if that heat advisory goes into the weekend, Saturday comes around and that's hot and I want to call and get my water reconnected, we have to work through that process. We don't have people working over the weekend. I do believe that the bill itself says that it's, during business hours, but we have to be clear with our customers on what that entails. So the reality of shutoffs and how shutoffs are currently working in the city. What we're seeing on a utility level is the majority of our shutoffs are not due to an inability to pay. People are just not putting the importance on paying. They get turned off and they immediately get turned back on. Roughly to 90 to 95% of our customers pay that same day. Very rarely do we have one that even goes a whole day before they get reconnected. As you mentioned, we're averaging about 45 residential shutoffs a month, which represents 1% of our total customer base. We have about 4,500 utility customers. As far as this bill and what will ultimately probably end up being a delay of shutoffs, theoretically July, August, maybe even September. What this does is it just compounds those challenges. If people sometimes aren't forced to pay, they don't pay, and then the problem just snowballs. We saw this during COVID. We also have staff impacts, like I mentioned, of dealing with this. Customers have many more options to be able to pay quickly. The ability to use a credit card means you might not have to have the money right now, but you can put it on your credit card, and then when you get paid on Friday, you have money to pay off your credit card bill. Just makes it that much easier. And as always, we continue customers to contact us before shutoffs, work with us. We are always very, very helpful in helping people avoid that shutoff process altogether. That is our preference. We don't want to have to turn anyone's water off. We'd like to deal with it beforehand. The process of doing shutoffs is labor intensive for us and for the field staff. So with this, we have kind of looked at our shutoff policy and we're proposing a recommendation of changing our reconnection fee. So our reconnection charge was $15. And in 2005, I sat before council, probably stood before council, and had that changed to $40. What we're seeing now is that $40 amount is not punitive enough to change people's behavior, right? Oh, my water got turned off. I'll get on my phone, pay my bill, call up the city. We'll have to send someone back out there to turn it back on. The $40 fee, it's kind of an inconvenience, but it's not changing someone's behavior. So our recommendation is to increase this reconnection charge to $75, hoping that a little bit higher, might get someone to say, boy, I got that shut off notice. I want to pay that $75 fee again. I better get it paid. I better call the city ahead of time and make payment arrangements if I need to. I'm hoping that the $75 will kind of catch people's attention. And then with that, we would be increasing our after hours reconnection charge. So currently, if you come home and say you work late and you get home at 6 o'clock at night and city staff has all gone home and you're without water, you call the emergency line and you say, I don't know why I don't have water. And they say, well, it was turned off for non-payment. You have the option to be able to pay $160 right now to have someone from our shops crew dispatched out on overtime to come and turn your utilities on that night. So we would be upping that rate as well from 160 to 200. And that's on top of the $75 reconnection charge. So, and then kind of looking ahead with the new utility rates that will go into effect, we're kind of planning a utilities 101 education for all of our customers following the rate study later this winter. What we're thinking is, this is kind of going to be the first step in this state mandate and restricting our ability to collect these fees. And I believe that in the not too distant future, we will probably be prohibited from doing disconnections. Similar to like doing away with library fines, right? We will have to find some other way to collect these past due accounts other than disconnecting someone's utility services. So these cost requirements, they just get pushed off onto the ratepayers that are paying. Which, then has to raise rates. So I think that is it. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? Councilmember Newman. Oh, Councilmember Stewart now.
Thank you. So Jeff, I'm curious about considering a policy that would put us back in the COVID era. When we were in the midst of COVID, can you explain to me again how we handled shutoffs during that time?
Yes, so during COVID, we were prohibited from doing shutoffs. We could not do them at all during the governor's emergency declaration, and we went 2 years, probably the most part of 2 years without doing any shutoffs. We worked with customers as we came out of that, gave people more time than other utilities did to try to get themselves caught up, and ultimately worked down what was a fairly large list of past due accounts to something that was pretty manageable, and really ended up with not that large of a disconnect list the first time we did it in over 2 years.
Okay, thank you. I remember that period of time, and I'm curious now that we have an unfunded, well, I call it an unfunded mandate, a mandate from the legislature to not terminate service during high heat times. Would you consider it a possibility that maybe the council could consider defining the high heat times, whether it's mid-May to early September, and just have it be just like COVID? Don't shut off, don't send notices out. I know that's a burden on the staff to play catch up, but maybe it's better than having to turn on, turn off. Oh, it's going to be hot over the weekend. We got to be ready, blah, blah, blah. It just seems like it may be a possibility of more cut and dried operating procedures. That's just my opinion, and thank you very much.
Yeah, I can respond to that quickly. So that is something that we considered. Maybe we would just flat out say we're not going to do disconnects during the summer. That does create problems is then when we can do disconnects, we have larger bills. We're also limited in how many months we can collect for past due water based on state law. So the larger the time frame goes, the more difficult it becomes for us to collect. So, and with this new law, what we're going to do is we're going to try to be as cautious as possible and kind of err on the side of caution, where if we think that there's a heat advisory that's in effect, Monday and Tuesday, and shutoffs are coming Wednesday, we're probably not going to do shutoffs. So that way we don't go through this turning them off one day and then having to go back and turn them all on the next day because people have contacted us and now it's warm out. Hopefully the forecast will allow us to kind of hedge our bets a little bit.
Councilmember Newman.
Thank you. What are our current capabilities of being able to send reminders to people for paying their bills? What's our main form of communications?
So our main form of communication is letters in the mail for disconnects. The bill itself, correct. Customers that pay online can sign up for online email reminders. And at some point in time, we are working with our software provider to provide text message reminders, which is going to be kind of something in the future.
Okay, so I feel like the text is really important because of the immediacy in which people can see it and respond. And all of our email accounts have filled up with so much spam that sometimes it can be difficult to get through. But so, and when we do that, do we do reminders before they've missed? Well, actually, I know that we do by mail, that there's a reminder before there's a cutoff. Is there an email reminder?
No, so there's just the simple past due shut off notice, and folks can get those emailed to them instead of mailed to them by paper, but that would be it.
But they have to sign up to get it emailed?
Yeah, as like getting your bill.
That's how we get the email address?
Yeah, you can get your communications electronic. And as you mentioned, ultimately going to additional text message reminders is something that we would like to do. The technology is just not quite there yet, but it's close. And that's something we want to do, but we want to make sure that it works when we do it. And right now, it's not quite there.
Okay, I'll tell you, I struggle with these increases. I understand that can be a burden for staff, but we can also choose to do things a little bit differently to reduce the burden. I do empathize and I do understand that sometimes this is a way to just collect the bill, like to get someone to finally pay their bill. I do empathize with that. But I would like to see us go to a text message form of warning. I can tell you, I'll do full confession. So 2 different credit cards, and didn't pay attention to the date and hadn't yet set up the automatic system. One texted me and one did not. And it was the one that did that got me to pay both of them right away. You know, and I think like if we can improve our technology, that it could help with some of these issues. And I'd rather see us work on that first than do these kinds of jumps. I mean, 40 to 75, that's almost 100% increase. So I struggle with that kind of a jump. My 2 cents.
Thank you. Councilmember Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm in the same boat as far as struggling with that kind of an increase. And I also understand that it's a burden on staff to have to track and chase the people that have the ability to pay, but just don't until they have to, versus the ones that truly are, picking which bill they're going to pay that month. Having been in that scenario as a kid and having periodically the water does get shut off, and trying to scramble to get enough money to put it back on was a chore. And it somewhere in between, whether it's a graduated reconnect process, each time it gets more expensive, or some other education type program. I know we have done a tremendous amount of notifications that go out, and been very generous on the bills for the people that it's the big difference is the people that can pay versus the ones that are really struggling, and having something there to offset that. But what that looks like, I'm not sure. I do like the idea of the study results and what that might look like as far as fees. And I don't know that the study covers reconnects, disconnects or reconnects, but it is something that I'm a little uneasy about right now.
Thank you. Councilmember Botetto.
So they're talking about hot weather. So when are they going to talk about cold weather? If the state is going to start making, these requirements for that temperature range. So what about when it's freezing outside?
It's likely. This piece of legislation was done based on the fact that power companies cannot disconnect electricity and power during cold weather months. So with this bill, it is water utilities and power and electric utilities now cannot disconnect during hot months. So this is the first time that the city of Sumner, being a water provider, has been brought into this sort of legislation. But that's a likely next step, is that in the winter when it's cold out and freezing, we might not be able to do it either.
Right. Okay. Well, just looks that way from what we hear. Thank you.
All right. You have anything? Okay. Mr. Wilson, did you want to give your city administrator report before we go into executive session?
Yeah, because it's really short. I don't have one. So
Okay, I like that.
I guess one thing is just a reminder that Mayor Hayden and I will be attending the AWC conference next week. So Ms. Marquez will be running the regular council meeting, and it's on a Tuesday next week because Monday's a state and federal holiday.
All right. And before we break into executive session, do we have any council meeting issues coming up?
After talking with the chief, the public safety won't meet next week.
No public safety next week. Okay. Councilmember Reed, do you have any?
Originally, I thought I might, but I think that meeting has already been canceled, so no.
Okay, all right. And seeing none, how about committees? Any committee? Nope. Okay. So we will adjourn to executive session for the purpose of discussing with legal counsel representing the agency litigation or potential litigation per RCW 42.30.110 for a period not to exceed 20 minutes.
And we're going.
And good.